If you only had one shot to hook that trophy fish while on the water, could you make it? You had one chance to make that perfect cast that the fish sees it and hooks up. Today we're heading to South Carolina to find out how you can put it together for redfish so you can make that shot next time you are on the water. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and guides than just about anyone out there. Johnny Mainero from Blackwater Revival Guide Service is going to take us on a trip to understand redfish, the history, the fishing. We're going to get into it all today. You're going to find out when you should be planning your next trip and what you should be thinking about for what to avoid. You're going to find out how to find the fish and position yourself for success, and his take on the best rod to use for redfish. And this, a little hint here, this is not a super fast action rod. We're going to talk about it today, the best rod for redfish. Plus, you're going to find out why he's adding sharks to his program potentially in the coming year. Stay tuned. Let's find out why we aren't following the milk route. Here we go. Johnny Mainero from fishingblackwater.com. How you doing, Johnny?
I'm good, Dave. How are you?
Great. Thanks for setting some time aside today to dig into a species that we've talked about a few times, and we might talk about more than just redfish, but we're going to dig into a little bit on what you have going there in your neck of the woods, South Carolina, and that area. And but before we get there, maybe what's going on this time of year? I know you're out fishing a little bit. Take us into like December, January. What's that look like for you?
Yeah, so it's actually been a pretty good winter, business and fishing wise. So this time of the year, redfish kind of go through cycles, but I'm sure we'll get into like the whole deal of that later on. But this time of year, our fish are starting to move shallow. The water clears up, and they push into bigger schools this time of year. So on the fly fishing side of things, November through January months are pretty good. You could actually really see through the water, which sometimes is an issue in warmer months, but it's super clean. The fish are usually happy to eat. You can kind of make your approach to them before like bumping them. Like a lot of times earlier in the season, water's dirty and it's like you get that 10-foot shot, you got to make it happen. Like this time of year, like sometimes you could see them a ways off.
All right.
It's good for, all kinds of anglers in the wintertime.
Nice. So this is it. So wintertime. And then are you fishing out there? Like, what does that look like throughout the year? Are you pretty much like all year long, all the months?
Yeah, we're a 12-month-a-year fishery.
Yeah.
So, typically on the fly side of things, people are coming here to fish for redfish. But, we do the speckled trout. There's always a bycatch flounder mixed in. And then there's other little species that come through that are cool, like summertime things like ladyfish. And we'll get bluefish this time of year. So there's, predominantly it's a red fishery, but it's 12 months a year.
12 months. Okay. And talk about your location. Where are you at? What are you fishing?
I'm in Georgetown, South Carolina. We're about 45 minutes south of Myrtle Beach and about an hour north of Charleston. So we're kind of smack in the middle of those two destinations. So Georgetown is it's basically it's the fourth largest watershed by discharge on the eastern seaboard, and it's the largest watershed in the state. So, in my opinion, when you cross into Georgetown, you come over the bridges over the Waccamaw and the PD River. This is really the true start of the low country of South Carolina. It's a super pretty area. It's relatively natural, and it can never be developed south of Georgetown for 43 miles on the coastline. So it's you can get lost out here,
wow.
And there's still plenty of water to explore here that's not spoiled by man.
Right. And you're right on. And so the area you're fishing, maybe talk about that. Are you fishing specifically? I mean, I see some bays and things like that. What's the redfish? Is there a large area that you're covering?
So we fish the Winyah Bay estuary, but so we'll fish bigger water, and then we'll fish like ditch creeks. Like it could be anything from like a main channel and back in the creeks in the marsh to like a small ditch that I could barely get my skiff into, to open water in the bay. It just kind of depends on what we're doing. Like we'll throw topwater bugs like gurglers and poppers, in bigger water, just covering water with the trolling motor down. And then when we're pulling, we're pretty up close and personal. It's like we're bow hunting for these fish. We're stalking them. So it varies, but this time of the year, it's typically smaller water fishing, shallower water, a foot and a half or less. trips, and we're fishing around low tide typically.
Low tide. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to get into all this today, and we're going to probably focus on a little bit, maybe, this time of year, winter time. But before we get there, let's jump back into your background on fishing. How did you come to, be running a guide operation there?
So I've been fishing longer than I can remember. I grew up, and it's funny. I'm a northern boy that's transplanted in the South, and I think I'm from a state that everyone makes fun of, but I'm from New Jersey originally.
Oh, right. There you go.
So I grew up fishing the Barnegat Bay. I lived on a boat throughout every summer of my life as a kid until I was 18 years old. So I grew up running around the bay at a young age. I was always into the striper thing. My feather in my cap. I was in the newspaper twice when I was 5 years old for stripers and flounder. So I thought that was pretty big deal back in the day. But so I kind of I did a lot of boat fishing. But when I got old enough to drive, I did a lot of surf casting for stripers. I was a big surfer and surf fisherman. So the water's always been like a focal point of my life. I don't think there's anyone that I talk to on a daily basis that I walk up on the street and they're not, the first thing that doesn't come out of their mouth is like, hey man, how's the fishing?
Right.
That's how I'm seen by everybody. That's just been my whole life. And so I started fly fishing when I was 11. So about 21 years ago, I started fly fishing, and I was actually playing AAU basketball, and one of the teammates' dad was big in the yellowfin fishing with fly rods in Jersey, and that was kind of a niche thing to do. There wasn't many guys tuna fishing with a fly rod, and I always thought he did a lot of striper fishing too. But I always thought it was so cool. And my dad approached him one practice and said, "Hey, Johnny wants to learn how to throw a fly rod," and we would go through basketball practice, and then after basketball practice would have a 20-minute fly casting lesson. So I did that for when I started. And it's just like anything as you get older. I got more into plug throwing a little bit through high school because that's what my friends were doing, but I always kind of circled back to fly fishing. So fast forward, I at 18 moved to South Carolina, and I went to Coastal Carolina, and I got a job with Orvis as a fishing manager through college. So I worked for Orvis for about 5 years, 6 years as a fishing manager. So that really opened the door up for this area to me in the fly fishing. It's where I met one of my good buddies and mentors, Jeff Laddick. I fished some really cool stuff around the area, and it really opened the door up for me to really dive into it here.
Right. Where was that store? At?
It was in Myrtle Beach.
Oh, Myrtle Beach.
It was in Myrtle Beach. It was right in Myrtle. It's an outlet now, but we had a good program going. There was very, very little fly fishing availability of information or tackle or just camaraderie in the area. And we put together, me and a couple buddies put together the Grand Strand Fly Fishers, and we would have a meeting at Orvis monthly. And we pulled in a group of about 50 people, and it was cool. Like, we would shut the store down, get beers, everyone hang out. We'd either have a seminar on fly tying or how to read trout water, because we have a lot of people in this area that have come from somewhere else to retire. And, within 5 hours, we've got Western North Carolina, which arguably might be the best trout water on the Eastern Seaboard, right? So, like, we had these guys who moved down from Pennsylvania and Jersey. They were all trout guys. And so we would do that kind of stuff. We would take day trips up to, this lower Saluda, which is a tailwater in Columbia that they stocked trout in, but they hold over. And then we would do, we'd get a little guided trip together and get some skiffs and take the guys out. So we had a really good camaraderie, and that was from about 2013 through 16. And then I transferred to the Orvis store up in Charlotte for a little bit, and I worked there, and then took a couple other career paths and made my way back to Georgetown about 4 years ago, and jumped right into the guiding. So I've been guiding here for about 4 years. I've been truly full-time for a year now.
Nice.
And it's been good.
How's it feel when you're, the full-time guide versus, kind of however it was before? Does it feel like is it a lot different, or?
It makes me feel a little bit, I don't know. personally, it makes me, it's just myself, like my mind's made up makes me feel better about myself that I say I'm full time than I'm part time. But
Right, right. So you're not worried about paying the bills, sort of thing. There wasn't any. I'm sure there was some of those thoughts.
yeah, but now you got to learn how to pay the bills through the winter time
Right.
when the clientele's slow. But it's, it took a long time. I've had my captain's license for, gosh, 10 years. So this was my friend Jeff and I originally, before I moved away for a little bit, were supposed to go kind of partner up, and I got my captain's license, and just life didn't work out at the time. And it took me 8 years after I got my captain's license, or 6 years after I got my captain's license, to jump into it. And I almost let it go. It was really close to just letting it go. And so happy. And it was very scary going full time, just because, you got two little kids, and, you got to pay for a house and all
Sure.
the bills. But it was scary. But honestly, I don't think everyone says this is kind of cliche for guys to say. He's like, I don't think you're ever going to be rich doing it,
No.
but it's bar none the best ride to the office in the morning.
Right. Yeah, it is. That's really cool. What is you mentioned New Jersey and kind of up north with stripers. What's the stripers versus redfish? Can you compare? Are there any comparisons?
Yeah, so they have similarities and differences, right? So striped bass are a heavily migratory fish, right? So you're fishing the migration. There are fish that are resident fish in Jersey, like around the jetties in the wintertime. You'll get those schoolie fish, the little small fish, but they're predominantly, you're fishing a migration. And the striper fishing up there is best from like April through June, and then September through early December. So these fish are, moving from their spawning grounds north in the fall, in the spring, chasing the cooler water and the food, and then they're making their way back in the fall. So they're not readily as available throughout the year as redfish. They're similar in body makeups somehow, but a redfish is typically a home body until it hits spawning age. So these fish will broadcast spawn offshore, like your bull reds, like the big redfish you see, 35, 40-inch fish. These fish are the ones that are spawning offshore. They broadcast spawn, and their eggs float into the estuaries. And when those eggs hatch, those fish will stay in that estuary till they hit about 32 inches. So it could take them 7 to 10 years before they're mature, and then they go do the spawning thing. So the fish that we have in our estuaries have been here their whole life, predominantly. Like, you catch a tagged fish, it might have been tagged 5 years ago, less than a mile away, which is wild. So that's probably the main difference on like the targeting thing. It's just like redfish is non-migratory, and from a conservation standpoint, they're both very important, but there's different ways to manage a striper past than a redfish, just because. But I think from an angling standpoint, the striper fishing is definitely more of a cult following. It's stripers are a lifestyle. Like, it's people live in their vans through the whole
Oh, really?
migration. Oh, dude, yeah,
So it's
like
different than and I think of some of the, like the steelhead anglers in the past, or things like that, where it's
mhm.
that similar thing. People are living out of their car on in a van by the river, right?
Oh, dude, they live for it. These guys, like, it's just different, and it's regional too. Like, the Jersey, New York striper anglers are hardcore. Most of them build their own rods. Most of them build their own plugs. Everyone ties their own flies, but these guys live for it. You got to be there at the right tide, and that right tide might be at 3 in the morning in the river.
Yeah.
And you park in your van on a side street and take a nap till 2 o'clock, and get out of the van and start fishing through that buttery tide that you want to fish. But
Yeah.
it's definitely, from a camaraderie standpoint and a following, there's definitely a following in redfish, but the way that people get eaten up by striped bass in the Northeast is definitely a little different which is cool. It's cool and bad, because then there's a lot of tempers flaring on the beach too.
Yeah.
When the stripers thing's going on, it's just different, like,
Yeah.
there's not much of a surf casting.
Oh, right, right, right. What about the catching? What about the whole which one? If you had to pick one, stripers versus redfish, the fight, that kind of the everything, which one is the?
It's hard to say, because there's so many different ways to. I don't think I'm super interested. I've never really been interested in chasing stripers in a boat in the ocean, because it's like you're fishing blitzing fish, and there's not really any technicality to it.
Right.
Like, if you present the right size bait, and they're probably going to get bit. Surf casting is definitely more technical. And when you catch one in the surf, with a fly rod, there's a lot of, I mean, it takes a lot of time and work sometimes to get one bite, so, but I really, really like sight fishing. The red fishing is really cool because, it's like I just like sight fishing, like in Connecticut, they'll sight fish for the stripers on the flats. And I'm sure I'd enjoy that too. But fight wise, they're similar. A redfish is like kind of like a bulldog. They're not going to pull you're not going to pull you in a 30-inch fish is probably not going to pull you into the backing. They might get you a little there, but they're just going to nose down and they're trying to get that fly out of their mouth and they're just nose down and pulling.
Right.
A striper will pull a little bit, I wouldn't say harder, but they blitz a little bit more. Like they'll pull a little more line off your reel because they're usually swimming in open water. They might have a different makeup of muscle mass and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I really do like the red fishing in shallow water is pretty special. Watching them eats, there's really few things you compare to watching a redfish eat a fly 10 feet off your feet. It's pretty cool.
That is cool. So let's jump into on a little bit just on South Carolina. We've been down, we fished Virginia. We've kind of been around the area a little bit, but the Southeast is definitely a part of the country we haven't spent as much time. So maybe talk about that South Carolina. I know where you're at as you go north, you head to North Carolina and eventually you get into maybe some of those trout waters. But what is overall just South Carolina? If you had to say, have you fished a lot of it? Do you know a lot about just South Carolina itself?
Yeah, I know a fair amount about, the fishing around South Carolina. I fished like Midlands rivers for like smallmouth and largemouth and bowfin, and I haven't done much mountain trout fishing in South Carolina, but there's some good water.
There is some. Too, there is some up. Like, do you have to go north? Like, where do you go? What's the town where you get into like the mountains of South Carolina?
So you start getting like the foothills, I guess, around probably west of Spartanburg. Fountain Inn is pretty close to a lot of the trout water. Like there's the Chattooga River and the Chaga River in South Carolina.
Yep.
I don't think in my opinion, in the trout side, DNR doesn't manage the trout waters as well as say North Carolina does.
Yep.
Because the economic impact in Western North Carolina of trout fishing is pretty high.
Grand Teton Fly Fishing is a premier guide service and fly shop that has access to some of the most coveted rivers and lakes in western Wyoming. Their simple goal is to share their valued resource and have you experience a native cutthroat trout rising to a single dry fly in the shadows of the Tetons. You can check out Grand Teton right now at grandtetonflyfishing.com. Let them know you heard of them through this podcast. The fish are moving and the runs are coming fast. Gear up for all your swinging adventures with the RS collection from Skwala Fly Fishing. You can head over to skwalafishing.com right now and use the coupon code WetFlySwing10 at checkout to get 10% off your first order. That's WetFlySwing10 at checkout to get 10% off. It's interesting because you hear a lot about North Carolina, right, with the trout fishing, and
you do. Yeah.
In South Carolina, you don't hear as much, but there are other species. So, what do you think top? If you just say South Carolina, I mean, obviously, redfish is probably. I always think of just those species: steelhead, redfish, stripers, all these smallmouth bass. What do you think are the top South Carolina species? If you had to say maybe the top 4 or 5.
Well, definitely redfish.
Number one, is that no question? It is kind of redfish the one.
Yeah, and especially on the saltwater side of things. Yeah, like as a game fish, your redfish, bottails, there's all different names people call them here, but redfish is probably the predominant game fish in South Carolina, in my opinion. Striped bass is actually the state fish of South Carolina.
Oh, really?
All of our lakes were introduced with stripers at some point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you've got the basically the PD River system, and then you've got Lake Watery. The Santee Cooper River system is super well known for striper fishing. So there's a heavy striper following in the lakes, and it's a little different. I used to fly fish for them in the lakes too, but it was kind of a dedicated thing. You had to be there like first light, and they would blitz on bait, and it was a lot of fun to catch them like that. But most of the striper fishing here is guys, bait fishing for them, jigging for them, and trolling for them. Next, I'd probably say the next species, speckled trout. is big, like this time of year, especially like speckled trout fishing's a big thing. And you can't ever discount a flounder. Everyone, especially I think once you hit the age of like 60, you owe it. It's like
Flounder.
you're willed to be dragging a mud minnow bucket around in a john boat with your buddies catching flounder. I don't know what it is, but you drive around South Carolina in the summertime in the creeks, all the old guys are out there in their john boats with their own minnow bucket catching flounder.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the fly side of things, definitely a redfish. I mean,
Yeah.
people are traveling here to
Yeah.
redfish.
That's why, like, if you're heading to South Carolina for fly fishing, if you just take it to fly fishing, it's going to be redfish, and then everything else is kind of below it: striped bass, speckled trout.
Yeah,
Flounder.
and there's some guides there's some guides throughout the state that do some warm water freshwater fly fishing. Like there's the Broad River up towards Chester, South Carolina, all the way through Columbia. That there's a really good little smallmouth fishery up there that's super inaccessible, but there's guys that you could float it, but there's not many access points, so it's not heavily fished, but there's plenty of good smallies. And there's a couple guys in Columbia that do the stripers on fly as well in the rivers.
Yep.
So
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that gives us a little rundown there. And so taking it back into redfish, and specifically, let's just start with, again, back to this time of year. So it's, let's just say kind of late December, January, kind of in that period. It sounds like the waters are clear. Would you say it's easier to catch? Like, why wouldn't people, you would think this time of year, with the weather being, I'm guessing, pretty decent down there, you would think you would get a lot of traffic, like as far as people wanting to come down for maybe to get away from the cold up north to fish. Is that not the case?
yeah, so I mean, typically, all right. So South Carolina is kind of in a weird spot. Like we still get seasons here.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I mean, I've already fished a couple days that have been, left the boat in the morning and it was, high 20s, low 30s. But
wow.
It
Okay.
tends to warm up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So this time of year, like with that, I mean, the clientele that we're getting this time of year are usually the more tuned in fly fishermen. Our regular customers start showing up this time of the year. You get the holiday
Yeah,
guys.
right.
There is, with Georgetown being where it's situated, we don't get a lot of Charleston clientele. Most of our clientele is coming out of Myrtle Beach, Murrells Inlet, Pawleys Island. So we get that northern stretch of the strand of South Carolina that comes down to see us. So the fishing's good, but especially down around Christmas time and there's holidays and people are traveling and then everyone spends their money during Christmas. So January gets a little slow, but the fishing's great.
Yeah, it's great.
We're trying to make, and we'll get into this later, I got partners and we're trying to make this more of a destination fishery.
Yeah, it seems like it could be for sure, especially since South Carolina maybe isn't on the map. I think it is for redfish. I mean, I think I'm not sure even where the places you can catch redfish. It seems like redfish are spread throughout. Do you know much about kind of the distribution of redfish
Yeah. Like throughout the whole country, basically?
Yeah, the whole country, yeah.
Yeah, so typically redfish will make it as far north, not in numbers, but as far north as, New England. Like every now and again, someone's catching one off the surf or whatever. But typically redfish are from Virginia through Texas, right? And basically the whole Southeast, minus South Florida and what they've got going on down there, because they got more tropics down there too. But the redfish, speckled trout, and are pretty much the game fish of the Southeast, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
The difference between us on the eastern seaboard and the Gulf Coast is we have 4 tides a day. So we have semi-diurnal tides. So the water moves 4 times a day. Like we get 2 highs a day and 2 lows a day. So there's a lot of water movement. So we're fishing a lot of tide windows, and we have to work the tides for the fishery, right? So, but the redfish populations are typically, the strength of them is typically due to how much pressure a fishery has. Like I said, they don't move around. Like they don't migrate. So if you hammer down on a fishery and people are not doing the right things, you could really hurt a population of redfish.
Right. That's right. So you were just saying like actual sport fishing, like that could make a difference on.
Yeah, if they would manage redfish on a smaller scale basis rather than a large scale like statewide, because 30 miles down the road, the population can be a lot different than my population. You know what I mean? So it's hard to do. And, politics and fishing never really work out together.
Right.
So, which kind of sucks. But, you know, it all boils down to a good spawn too. Like if you have a good spawn and you get a lot of these you're catching a lot of these 9-10 inch rat reds. People are like, we only caught rats today. But if we catch a handful of rat reds, that means in a year or two, we're going to have a great year class of fish there. Because if you have a bad spawn and miss a whole year class of fish, that's a big deal. Like that's what they're battling in the Chesapeake with the stripers right now.
Yep.
Big time. Like they've lost the only year class of fish that's strong up there right now is the 2018 year class of striped bass. And they're working like hell. The American Saltwater Guides Association is working like hell to try to get the slot bumped up so that year class of fish, that 18-year class that was really good spawn, is protected next year.
Right.
So, but it's kind of the same thing. It's the redfish typically in South Carolina, the slot size of redfish is 15 to 23 inches. And a redfish stays in their slot for about 8 months.
Okay. And what is slot? What do you mean by slot?
So you can only keep them from 15 inches.
Oh, that's the slot. Like, so people are keeping and eating these fish.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they're good. So redfish are good to eat.
Yeah, we tell people they have worms in them now, so they don't.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, that's right. But, yeah, you don't think about that. It's interesting because of course, I love always think about that because there's this catch and release, a lot of that, right? The conservation.
Well, especially like the trout fishing, especially like, out west in Montana and Western North Carolina, your clients, you could probably count on one hand how many guys you see with a spinning rod in your hand.
Yeah.
In a drift boat, right? Like 90%. When I fished the lower Missouri with Jeff out there, I didn't see anyone spin fishing.
Yeah, nobody. It was all fly.
There's no fly fisherman bashing a 20-inch brown over a rock.
No,
that's just not how it goes. So, I feel like when you have more conventional fishing pressure, especially there is an entitlement to some people that if the limit's 6, if the limit's 2 per angler and it's 6 per boat, I'm taking 6.
Yeah.
Like that's just.
Do you think that part of obviously you've seen that in other species around, and so that can have an impact. Obviously if there's enough people killing fish, that's making a dent.
Oh, absolutely. Well, redfish only spawns once a year, right? So speckled trout, like, because when you're a saltwater guide, especially in a place like we are, you have to be tuned in with light tackle fishing, and that's just part of the game. Like that's just how it goes. You have to have that in your back pocket. And if somebody's like, I want to take a couple fish home, all right, that means we're going to go look for speckled trout because speckled trout spawn 4 times a year. They migrate. They're sustainable. If I killed 6 redfish every day, I'm killing my business partner.
Right.
It's just they take a longer time to grow. They spawn less, and their spawning cycle's more. There's more things that can go wrong in a redfish spawn.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, like the water quality, right? You could have
the
some
water
issues.
Quality or how the currents work or a bad storm or whatever, so there's a lot of factors that fall into a successful spawn in a redfish.
Yeah.
But we have a South Carolina Coastal Guides Association here, and it's just starting to get the ball rolling. And if we could at least get guide boats to only have a limit of 2 fish per boat, just guide boats. In reality, that should not be a problem.
Yeah.
Someone's going to have a problem with it, but let's not target the recreational guys because that's when you have the uproar.
Right. Right.
Let's get these guides to be a little bit more cognizant. Like it's not about posting pictures of a bunch of dead fish on a fillet table anymore. That's not how it works.
No, that doesn't look. It's interesting because we had a conversation. We go back to Steelhead a little bit. We have the In the Bucket podcast. Brian Niska hosts that, and they had a conversation with, I think it was John McMillan. They were talking about steelhead and the history of like Skwala, Bob Hooton. They were talking about on the podcast, and we'll put a link to this episode. But it was interesting because back in the day, I can't remember how long ago, but 20, 30 years ago, Bob Hooton enacted in British Columbia catch and release on the Skwala River for steelhead. And at the time, people were trying to get him fired, and like there was lawsuits.
Right.
But now when you look at it, you're like, wow, the Skwala River, that's amazing. That's catch and release now. For fish and so I feel like there's always that first spot, that first part of it where people just think, they're out to get you because it seems so crazy. Yeah. But then people realize the importance of maybe restricting limits.
Exactly.
Right? Do you think?
Have you read The Lords of the Fly?
Oh, right. Yeah. We've actually did a podcast with the author on here. Yeah.
So you just you read through that book. And it's kind of
Crazy.
It's emotional kind of in a
Yeah,
way.
it
If
is.
you're tied into the fishing, but like literally, they were gaffing fish left and right.
I
For
know.
records, this, that, and the other
God,
thing. And tarpon at first was like the whole thing was like the ocean is endless, like the
exactly.
resource is endless. And then Texas used to have an incredible tarpon fishery,
Yep.
and it has been decimated. It is
Right.
gone. It is not like it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that's just a prime example
It
of
is a
how
great
you could
example.
like Homosassa, like that
Yep.
was the mecca.
And that's because of the famous people that were down there too, right? All these crazy stories like
Oh yeah,
sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? It was kind of that thing
exactly.
in Tarpon.
It was a wild crowd,
Yeah.
like that whole thing. But it's luckily there's still a couple people. Luckily, and the best thing that's happened to tarpon fishing is that the records are probably unattainable anymore. So people aren't trying to kill them anymore. Like
Oh,
these records are so high.
yeah.
There's the 16-pound record and the 20-pound record and the 12-pound record is pretty high,
Yeah.
and it's almost unattainable. Like, it's very hard to break that. So people aren't targeting those fish for records like that anymore.
Yeah.
And, it's just at some point in time, they had that personal responsibility where like, hey, we can't kill all these fish anymore. Like, and it kind of just turned around and, those fish live 70, 80 years. Our redfish live 40 years.
Oh, wow. Redfish are that old.
Yeah, bull redfish is about 30 to 40
And how
years
big
old.
is that? How big would a 40-year-old fish be?
So they grow fast juvenilely, right? So within, let's say 5 to 10 years, they're spawning, maybe a little bit shorter than that, maybe a little longer than that. But once they hit 32 inches, they start growing pretty slow after that. So when a fish hits 40 inches, it's probably 40-year-old fish.
Oh, gotcha.
So they usually don't get longer, they just get rounder.
Right, rounder.
Like,
That's right.
they get fatter. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and we do fish for the bulls, but you got to be cognizant of fishing for them too, because they're hardy, but when the water's warm and
Oh, right.
you put a lot of heat on them, sometimes they don't like to revive. So
Yeah.
like try to push I try to put out I don't know how much following you got, but I try to put out a blog post once it starts getting hot out to treat these fish right,
Oh,
and this
for
is how we
sure.
treat them right. Number
Yeah.
one's not to target them. The water's 80 degrees, but
Right. And when does that start? Does that kind of start, depending on the year, kind of like in June?
so as morbid as it sounds, we will bull redfish through, and that's mostly conventional. There's some fly opportunity in that, but we'll bull redfish the early, late spring. But the problem is we have a huge shark problem
Oh,
here.
wow.
So they start getting in the channels, and those fish get eaten by sharks.
No
So
kidding. What kind of sharks?
bull sharks, black tips, sandbar sharks, but mostly in a bay, it's big, grown bull sharks.
Like how big of a shark would be a typical?
I saw one this summer that ate a fish behind the boat that was probably 10 or 11 foot.
10
It
or
was
11 foot. Wow. So you're not,
giant.
you're not jumping out in the water necessarily landing fish?
No, I had a couple chicks. I'll pop off to a story here. I had a couple chicks that we fly fished in the morning and had a great day. Like it was perfect weather. Like it was beautiful. But this chick was from Colorado, like a native,
Yep.
from Denver, super fair skin
Yep.
and not used to 100% humidity. And we're fishing in the channel, like kind of end of the day. Like, sometimes when I'm fishing with a couple ladies, like my wife will be like, you need to bring a bottle of Prosecco and give these girls some mimosas on the boat. You got to treat the girls
Oh,
right.
right.
So I'll make them some mimosas on the boat or whatever. And man, we're fishing out in the channel. And Kelsey's like, I'm hot, man.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah. She's like, can I jump in here? I'm like, I wouldn't.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, bloop, she goes off the
She
side.
jumped in.
I was like, get back in this freaking boat.
Wow.
Like, I know it swims here. But yeah, no, not in
Damn.
the channels. We swim like in the beaches. But
Oh,
like,
okay. Oh, so the beaches right. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, you're fine, but you don't want to get out of the boat in the channel.
And so the channel is like you said, the bay, how do you say it?
Deep water.
Is it Wynnum Bay?
Winya.
Winya. So Winya Bay. So those sharks are turned into Winya Bay and eating redfish up there?
Oh yeah. I mean, we have, in the summertime too, like fishing in the creeks. I mean, if you get one that gets into deep water, there's a good chance it's going to get.
Wow. God,
eaten.
that's
Yeah.
intense. That's kind of like Well, it's not too dissimilar to bears, right, and things like that in other parts. Like, you just
Exactly.
you gotta be aware. You know, chances of you getting eaten by a shark are low.
Don't put your hands in the water to land a fish in deep water.
Right.
That's just, but it's kind of the shark deal's kind of flourishing all over the South, like with the predation of sharks on game fish, and you just got to be personally responsible. If you do lose a fish to a shark, even if the bite's good, you got to leave. You can't once that shark one fish gets eaten, you got to pack it in and go somewhere else.
Oh, because they'll just start eating
Yeah,
everything?
it's just it'll just every fish will get eaten.
Oh,
Those
gotcha.
fish we've trained, like anything, the outdoors, like the bears
Yeah,
and
same thing.
any kind of wildlife we've trained these animals in a sense, like they know why we're there. They know why we're there.
Right.
They know
Yeah, exactly.
they know what the boat brings. They know
Yep.
they know there's food. There's an
Right.
opportunity to eat. Same with gators.
What about the catching of sharks? Is there any shark fishing out there? Like, you ever hear that?
Yeah, there's plenty of it. Next summer is actually my number one goal for next summer is to really hone down on catching sharks on fly.
Yeah,
Like
that would be
chumming them
cool.
and
Sure.
throwing flies at them because they're so available, and it just bumps out because the redfishing could get slow in the summertime with the water temperatures being high. Like it just opens the door to a new type of thing that not really many people are doing.
No,
And it's exciting, dude.
it
Like,
is. It is. I'm not sure if you heard of Conway Bowman, but he's out on the other side. Yeah. So he's the Mako shark stuff. I mean,
he's the OG.
Yeah, he's the extreme, right? That's the big stuff. But yeah, I imagine if he's catching Makos, you can catch sharks anywhere. I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you figure it, it's anything. It's going to take a little bit of a learning curve, and I feel like I don't know how hard it's going to be. I say that, and then I'm going to go out there and it's going to be like permit fishing,
right?
But like hopefully that's the goal. I've had people express interest in doing it, so and we'll probably break a bunch of rods and destroy a bunch of gear, but hey, it'll be fun.
Cool. Well, let's jump. I want to hear on Redfish. So let's just kind of think a little bit like somebody's calling you now on the phone. They're going to your website or whatever, and they're saying, "Hey, I want to fish. I want to get a redfish. Maybe I've never caught one, never fished for one." Mm-hmm. What time are you telling them that maybe is a good time to come down there?
Really, any time from October through like mid-October through the winter.
Through until say what, like you said, like April, May.
Yeah, usually around Thanksgiving time is really good.
Okay.
The hardest times, weather-wise, are probably March because we get all those crazy winds and it's kind of unpredictable. Not that the fishing's bad, it's just sometimes from a safety standpoint of actually, because we have to cross a lot of water. We run big water here to get to the shallow water. Like, our bay's huge. Like if you look at it on a map, it's a big bay. So it's like there's a safety factor and that weighs into every charter, right? So like probably like the most consistent weather, happiest fish, probably mid-October through early December is like you're really active feeding. You'll see them busting shrimp in the creeks. That late fall fishing is really good. Then it transitions into the winter schooling fish, where the fish are a little bit slower, a little more lethargic, but they like to eat a fly. Like we have an advantage as a fly fisherman over conventional guys because we could throw a size 8 bonefish fly and get it there. You can't do that on a spinning rod. So like a lot of times they only want to eat a little shrimp, tiny little shrimp pattern, and we can do it in the wintertime. So that's the advantage of a fly fisherman this time of year here too. So, but like really that stretch of the time of the year, like summertime, you can take it or leave it. But sometimes that's when you're here, and we've caught plenty of fish in the summertime. It's just you just got to deal with the elements a little bit more. It's hotter. The water's dirtier. The biggest thing I have to say about, especially if you're not typically a saltwater guy, is I don't care if it's a 5 weight. I don't care if it's a 6 weight. Just get out in your yard and practice casting and delivering a fly at 40 feet with 2 false casts. That's right. Like once you start, because you got a lot of times in these small creeks and the tide's low, you got this real high grass behind you. So you got to learn how to cast over that grass and deliver a fly quickly. And sometimes these fish are on the move. So really work on if you're going fly fishing for redfish or any kind of saltwater species anywhere, in my opinion, invest a little time in yourself. Like get yourself ready to make your day on the water successful. The last thing you want to do is jump on someone's skiff and you're piling up 20 footers and it turns into a casting lesson. Like really invest some time in yourself. If you're super pumped about going on that first saltwater trip, like really, spend a little time. You do a little homework.
That's great advice, and I'm going to be taking that advice too. Moving ahead. We had Chris Korich on, who is actually a kind of a casting instructor. He's won a few of the tournaments and things like that. But he has guys out on the West Coast, same thing, where they've got lots of money and they come in and they're doing some trip to the Seychelles or something, and they're not good. And like, hey, I have a week. I have a week to learn to make these casts, right? But
that's right. And you don't want to learn there.
You don't want to learn there. Yeah.
I mean, in reality, fishing with a guide's expensive, no matter which facet you look at. It costs money. I mean, some people have different financial situations than other people, but really, like, you're paying for it. Really, just it costs you nothing to spend 10 minutes in the yard with a beer at your feet, or cast at your dog, run into the backyard. I mean, something. It's just important.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory, where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. What's when you're on the water? So maybe take us there a little bit. When you see, how are you finding these fish, and then talk about getting set up to make the cast.
So finding the fish, I try to make it a point, because I have my creeks that I don't fish. Usually don't fish the same creeks the same week. Like if I fish one, I probably won't fish it the rest of the week.
Okay. And these are like creeks, like little channels coming into the bigger bay?
Like little tributaries off, like in the marsh, just like off the main channel.
Right.
So I make it a point to, at some point in the day, fish a new ditch, or fish, I'm looking for stuff that's maybe a shallow entrance. Fish are safe from dolphins. Most ditches hold fish, in my opinion, but there's certain ditches that concentrate higher. Maybe that's just food source or access to the creek, and, little potholes. So, like, to me, it's just a process of elimination. It's just running down and covering water. And on my days off, I'm trying to find that new spot, so it's like any little hole in the creek, any little ditch could be the next one. So I mean, I try to just cover as much as I can on my time off, and try to fish a new place every day with a client. After we have, if you have some success, it's, hey, you want to go try a new spot, or or it's tough and we're not finding them. Like, what do we got to lose? Like, let's go jump into this new spot. So, like, try to make it a point to do that. And the biggest thing you don't want to run into, in my opinion, as a milk route. Like, you don't want to have that milk route that you're constantly going down, and then it's a vicious cycle, because then you get to the point where your milk route's not producing anymore.
Right.
And you're like, this place sucks. What's going on with this place? Like, the fishing,
Yep.
But that's any kind of angler, guide, whatever, and I'm a younger guide in perspective, but, like, if you're not always learning or trying to find something new, it's just going to hurt you. Like, this place, you never learn this. Like, you never know everything. Like, I don't care what kind of fishing you're doing. You don't know anything. And I always love to just listen to people, like, especially the old guys who might have been floating shrimp under a cork 30 years ago, like, telling me, like, about stuff they did 30 years ago. And it's like, you know what? Maybe I'll go try something a little different. Maybe I'll go over there where they used to catch them all the time. And, I don't know. I have no ego, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah.
I soak it all in as much as I can. I love it.
That's good. So pretty much, I mean, they could be anywhere, it sounds like. And I mean, but once you find a spot, let's just take it there. So once you see a fish, you're sitting there, talk about, that first cast. And
all right. So if I see a fish moving, number one, right-handed caster, I want them to have an 11 o'clock shot. An 11 o'clock shot, they're casting across the bow. I'm not going to get a new ear piercing if they're casting at 11 o'clock. And it's a more comfortable cast. So what I'm going to see, if I see fish working an edge, I'm going to try my damnedest to get that boat in a perfect 11 o'clock shot for the customer. So I'll pull my boat and I'll try to be as quiet as possible. I mean, if you hit an oyster loud, you could spook these fish. So like I'm trying to get this boat positioned just perfectly. And then when we feel like I got the boat right, boat position's number one. Like you have that boat position right. And then I'll call up to my client, "Hey, John, do you see that fish at 35 feet at 11 o'clock?" "Yeah, I see him. I see him." I said, "You see what way he's moving? Left to right." "Okay, he's moving on a string. Let's lead him by 4 feet." And so let's try leading him by 4 feet. Don't line him. Don't throw it on his head. Throw it out in front of him. Obviously I said leave the fly where it is. I'll tell you when to start moving it. Throw the fly. Fish is coming. All right. And I tell people like when I say tick, I want like little short, little jiggy strips, like 2-inch strips, just hopping on the bottom. If I want strips, I'm usually saying like a 8 to 10 inch strip. And if I'm saying bump it, just like bop, like 6-inch bump, just hopping it. So I'll be like, all right, ticket, 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 ticket. All right, he's on it. He's on it. Tick, 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 tick. Don't stop, don't stop. And then a lot of times I can see him eat, and I'll be like, all right, he's eating it. He's eating it. Keep that rod tip down.
Yep.
Don't trout that.
Right.
Sometimes I like when the customer can't see the fish eat.
Yep. Right.
They're not anticipating the bite. Like it happened. It happens. It's part of it. But like that's kind of how it is. It's a 2-man game.
Yeah.
Like I could see a lot more from the 3 foot above the motor than I am than the guy on the bow can, but both of you have to be on the same page when you're making a shot. And when you're not on the same page when you're making a shot, whether you make the shot or not, you kind of want to, if I can't see the fish and I can see the fish and he can't see it, I don't want him casting at it.
No.
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 If he lines it, there might be 2, 3 fish behind that fish
Right.
that blow out with that one. So it's like I'd rather let the fish fall off the edge and let it settle back in.
So how do you do that when you're up there? You can see the fish, but maybe he can't see the fish, and you're still guiding him into the, or are you waiting until he can kind of see that fish?
Well, I want to be honest to have an understanding with him, like that he can make the fish out, like he could see it. Like, and sometimes it takes a little while. What I'll do is if I'm pushed up on the mud, I'll get my push pole and put it on their shoulder, and I'll be like, I'll point the fish out, and then a lot of times that works. Like 'cause sometimes even though sometimes it's clear, if you have a real light colored fish, sometimes it'll contrast itself on the bottom. And like, sometimes the only thing you can see is that little bit of blue they got in their tail, and it just see that little blue like kind of waving like a fan. And then once you catch it, you're good to go. But like sometimes it is hard to see them.
Yeah, it's hard to see. Yeah,
it's hard to see them. And if you don't do it a lot, I think that was my biggest learning curve. Learning how to guide fish too, especially redfish, is like really getting all the hints to try to see that fish way before I actually need to see the fish. And I put a lot of time into what little hints on the top of the water, even if it's not a big V wake. Like if you see a tip up, like I try to observe everything. And I'm not a speed poler. Like when I pull a creek very slow. Like I've blown so many fish out, and I still blow fish out all the time. But I am trying to soak in every little bit I can before I move on. And I make people blind cast. Like I'm not ashamed to say it. Like if there's a pothole that I can't see the bottom, like, hey, let's stop right here, make 6 casts, and there might be one laying in here, and it works out sometimes, and like at the end of the day, Dave, when the guy's got that fish in his hands and he's showing his buddies and putting it on Facebook and he's stoked, that's all that matters. Like he wants to hold that fish.
Definitely.
And my job is to get that fish in his hands.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think if I was out there, it'd be the same thing. I wouldn't care how how I got into him as long as I'm hooking one.
Dude, well, I'm probably one of the only guys that will do this, but I'll dredge them. Like I'll throw sink tips at them sometimes. If I know it's a deep water school, I'll throw sink tips at them. Especially you get a musky guy, like some guy from the Midwest. He's like heavy musky guy, and you're like, oh, this guy, he's gonna bump and grind to get any bite he can get because he's into that. Like some guys don't like doing that, but if you get somebody who's like likes to get pooped on all the time, like a musky guy or a steelhead guy, they're in to do whatever.
Yeah, whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes.
So your tip so if somebody's out there, let's just say they're on their own or maybe they're with the guy, but what's the tip on getting better at spotting the fish?
Having good glasses, number one. You have a good pair of.
What's your go-to? What's your brand?
Right now, Smith. amber or a rose colored lens with rose color and like low light, or yellow and low light. Definitely glass. I wouldn't waste your money on polycarbonate lenses. I would only buy glass.
And what is glass? Glass just gives you more clarity.
Glass doesn't scratch. It's clear. People say it's a little heavier, but dude, I've been wearing the same Smith glasses for 4 years, and I've had plastic lenses, and they last maybe a half a season. They just get demolished. Having a good pair of glasses, and I think really for sight and fish is paying attention. Like, like the first time you go, like, ask what to look for. Like, sometimes they're blatant. Sometimes they're crawling down a bank and their body's out of the water.
Right.
Like, their whole back's out of the water. You see the spots on their tail. Like, but sometimes they're laying low. You just gotta listen to the guide. Especially if you're with a guide, listen to him. Tell him, listen to where he's telling you. But like DIY, and man, I mean, I think the most important thing is to go blow a couple fish out.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then you'll
learn.
You'll learn like, oh, there's a fish sitting on that bar right there that I discounted. Like, then you take that time to the next time you go to back up and be like, all right, there's nothing there right now, I don't think, but let me watch it for 30 seconds. And you see something. And then, like, so it's really, you got to teach yourself it.
You just got to do it. Put your time in.
You got to put your time in, and you got to learn what it's like to blow them out and get crapped on, because that's part of success, right?
That is. Well, when a person, so you got that fish out there, it's moving from left to right, you say 4 feet out, and that person makes the cast at 11 o'clock there, and then the cast is not even close. Like, what's the recommendation? Do you leave it in the water? Like, what do you do then?
It depends on what the fish is doing. If a fish, like, if it's behind the fish, all right, let's get it back in real fast. Like, keep the rod tip in the water. Let's get the fly back to us, and let's make another shot. If it's like way, way off, I mean, a lot of times I'm just like, dude, just strip it and pick it up, and let's redo this. But if it's in a bad spot, like they're close, like, hey man, let that fish swim. Like they threw it into the mud, and the fish is floating under their fly line. Like, dude, leave that thing right where it is.
Yeah,
let it pass. Yeah. And I don't think the redfish are like that everywhere. I think we just have sometimes our fish are a little more technical than, like Louisiana. You see those videos on or the Gulf. You see videos on Instagram all the time of a fish that wipes out a fly 7 times and then eats it on the 8th time. Like, that ain't happening here. Like, I've only had a fish refuse and come back to eat maybe once or twice. It doesn't, when a fish refuses or you bump it, it's pretty much, it's wrapped up. You got to go find a new fish. We had a group of fish yesterday. I mean, my buddy John, he just actually opened a fly shop in New Jersey on the Pequest River called Lost Gear, and he just opened a fly shop up there, and he was kind of doing a little East Coast hiatus of fishing. So he fished at Chesapeake earlier this week. He fished with me yesterday. And I guess their shop's in Belvedere, New Jersey, right next to the Pequest Hatchery. But we had a group of fish come around the corner, and it was, oh man, they were fired up. I mean, there were probably 10 of them, and they come around the corner and made a pretty good cast at them, and they got close. We strip, and then fish flared on it and lifted a rod a little bit, and we got another cast on them, but they were coming too hard at the boat, and then gone. But dude, honestly, in reality, especially with his first time red fishing on fly, like, it's pretty cool to see him that close. Like, just to be in their kitchen, and they don't know you're there until they know you're there. Like,
yeah, because they're focused, right? They're focused on their eating, and they're not really.
Yeah, and like, when a lot of times when there's more than one fish and they're moving pretty good, if you get it into them, there's going to be a little sense of competition between the fish.
Oh yeah.
Hey, if I don't eat this thing, Billy's gonna eat this thing.
Yeah, I better get it. But what is that thing typically? What's your go-to fly? Like, do you have just one or?
I love black and purple. Really, I tie a really simple shrimp pattern that's craft fur, that EP tarantula brush that EP has figured out how to really drain our bank accounts dry. But
yeah.
But a little bit marabou and bee chain eyes, Clouser style, hook point up. I mean, black and purple just seems to always do well. And then, any kind of like shrimpy or white bait fish pattern, like, dude, as much stuff's out there, still don't think there's any more fly that catches more fish than a Clouser.
Yeah, the Clouser, right.
and it could mimic so many different things. But it definitely matters the time of the year and what I'm throwing. Darker colors and dirtier water. I'll throw more chartreuse and purple in the summertime, just something a little bit more vibrant and poppy. Wintertime, like if they're real spooky, real clear, real lethargic, we're throwing little tiny shrimp patterns, 12-pound tippet, 10-pound tippet. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes you can throw anything at them and they'll eat it, but black and purple is like, if I don't have at least a dozen black and purple flies in my box, I feel like I'm not prepared for the day.
All right, so that's good. So black and purple, that makes it easy.
I think black and purple catches any fish.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think about black and purple. I mean, got steelhead. I mean, probably
salmon, everything,
salmon,
dude.
Yeah, you name it. Black and purple.
You can't discount that color.
Yeah, that's it. Cool.
I think it's a color spectrum thing.
Yeah, right. Well, let's take it out here real quick with the this is our kind of our gear checklist segment. So we're going to get into a little bit on the rods, the lines, just so people know exactly what to get. But today this is presented by 4 Wheel Campers, and we're going to give a shout out to 4 Wheel Campers. I'm not sure in your neck of the woods if you see many of these, but we just got a 4 Wheel camper. It's one of those pop ups, so on the back of the pickup.
How sick!
Right, it pops up 3 feet, and this thing becomes there's a king size bed on the top, right? And we've been loving it. We traveled from across to Wisconsin, and we're going to be heading up to Alaska as well in it. So that shout out to 4 Wheel Campers. I'm not sure if you see them around there in your neck of the woods. I'm guessing Southeast probably doesn't have as many, but I want to talk gear. So, well, let's just start there first off on the camping. So are you seeing, first of all, many of the campers? You see a lot of mobile homes, any of that stuff out in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so we do. I think there's more campers for sale in Myrtle Beach than maybe anywhere in the country.
Oh, really?
Dude, there's a during COVID, man. There was a camper place popping up every corner you looked at. But a lot of people use the campers as beach houses down here.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
So there's a lot of good camping opportunities.
Oh, there are.
Here. Oh, yeah, for sure.
So could you come down there for, like, if we were hooking up a trip with you, let's just say somebody's coming down for a day trip, could they camp around your area and do all that stuff?
Yeah, they could. So, I mean, if you want to bring your pop-up camper here, we could set you up in the front yard. We got the live oaks, and you'll have a riverfront view. Right?
Oh, there you go. Right.
But yeah. So there's a bunch of campgrounds around. There's some state land that you could camp on too. But there's the barrier islands. You can camp on some of the barrier islands, and like we'll do this. Every now and again, we'll get a group of guys that's got a permit to camp on the national seashore, and we'll load all their gear in the boat and bring them over there and go pick them up at the end of their trip. So like we'll do that, and that's pretty cool. I mean, you can kind of get pretty primitive. You know what I mean?
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's cool. I think there's a lot of opportunities. We've been doing kind of some of our trips in schools around the country and looking for where there aren't lodges, doing the Airbnb thing. But I know there's a lot of people that would love to just kind of road trip it, right? Like you said, start up north and work your way down towards Florida, whatever. I mean, there's tons of opportunities.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of a common thing too. I mean, it's more and more common that kind of stuff is available. I mean, especially during COVID. I mean, a lot of people have taken that kind of stuff up, and there's a big market for that. Like that's what my buddy John in Jersey is doing with his shop. Is it's not going to just fly fishing. He's going to do like the outdoor lifestyle and that kind of stuff. Because that's, we all know that you cannot be, in today's day and age, you can't just be a fly shop anymore. You have to have a little bit of everything, especially maybe out west.
Right. It might be different.
Like Cross Currents and Headhunters in Montana, like they're fly shops. Like here, like there's got to be some sort of lifestyle brand along with it. And I think the camping part of it and the outdoor lifestyle has really like the trajectory that has like taken off since 2020.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, since COVID, it's taken off. It's probably slowed maybe here that a little bit, but
yeah, because people are having to go back to the office now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They're back to the office. Yeah. I know that was the cool thing about the COVID thing. I mean, one of them. I mean, there's obviously terrible things about COVID, but the Zoom stuff and all that was actually made things, and a lot of people are working from home now, right? It made it a better experience.
It probably made, in a way,
save money.
Yeah, and have probably a little bit healthier mental lifestyle too. The people who, whatever, like, and the fishing was really good during those years too. So
yeah.
But it was a bad time, but there was a little bit of light in that dark time.
I know.
I think people kind of found themselves with the outdoors a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go in the gear a little bit, just quickly on like rod line. So what is the typical? First on, what's the line? You mentioned the sinking lines, but what's your typical line you're telling if somebody
So my
wants
typical lines, I don't know if I could say brands on here, but
Yeah,
like
sure. Yeah. Just
I
throw brands out
really
there.
like that Scientific Anglers Grand Slam line. It's a 3/4 heavy line. It's maybe for the hardcore guy who's got a really dialed in cast. The 3/4 heavy line definitely helps with some casting challenges. And the color scheme on the line really tells you where's the forward taper, where's the belly section, where's the running line. And that line I've been super impressed with. And I've put it on all my rods, and I typically fish. I fish 9 weights. Most guys fish 8 weights, but having a little extra rod, it never hurts.
9 weight. And what's the length on those?
9 foot, just regular 9 foot. Standard. 4-piece 9 weights, and typically the reel's not as important in the red fishing because, it's not bone. You're not bonefish or you're not going to melt the inside of your reel. If you're going to skimp on one thing on a saltwater setup for redfish, probably the reel. Buy the best line you can afford and buy the rod that's best for you. Don't buy, in my opinion, I see it a lot. I'm sure you do. I see a lot of guys that have never thrown a fly rod before and they're walking on the boat with an NRX, and that rod's just way too much rod for somebody who's just starting out or just doesn't have that mechanics of cast.
And what is the NRX? What's that one?
Like the Loomis, super, super tight, great rod, super tight rod though, just very fast, very unforgiving.
This is a great, I'm glad you went into this because I mentioned earlier the fly cast, and we've been doing some of this. And Chris Korich, we'll put a link in the show notes because it's such a good one. I mean, he's the guy who taught. I'm not sure if you heard of him, but he's the guy who taught Maxine McCormick, who was that 12-year-old girl who won like casting championships.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, he was her coach, right? And so when he was on the podcast, he talked about how the industry has gone so far to these super fast, super stiff rods, and the problem is that especially people new. That's the worst rod you can have. You want a full action rod that you can feel it in the handle, right? Like you want
it to work for you.
Yeah.
That's it's awesome because I get a lot of clients. I have a guy that started conventional fishing with me, took up fly fishing and loves it. But he literally texted me and said, I want a new rod for Christmas. I'm not picking this thing out. I need you to help me pick it out. And I hate to say it, the industry's try to kind of set standards for what you have to have, and that's kind of the toughest thing for a new angler because the new angler wants to, especially if they are financially okay to do it, why not get that Scott Sector or whatever. It's not the right rod for you,
and that's the reason why. Yeah, that's the reason why not to.
Well, so a very famous fly fisherman fished with another client of mine here before I started guiding here, and he had a really tight rod, like my buddy did. And this guy, everyone knows him, was watching casting, said to him, buddy, nothing against you, but that rod's just a little too good for you. You're not good enough for that rod.
That's awesome.
Try this rod. And gave him a lower rod, and the dude was throwing laser beams. I typically, my boat rods I'll have one really good fast rod, and then I fish a lot of TFO stuff right now. Just they're great guide rods for salt. And I fished a mangrove. It's a softer rod, but a good angler could cast it and not think it's a piece of crap.
And what is that rod?
The TFO mangrove.
Oh yeah, TFO mangrove. Okay.
Yep. So it's a very versatile stick, and it's
Would you say it's kind of full flex? Would you say it's
more like a mid? I'd say more like a mid, but it's still got some tip tightness too. So you're not gonna it's not gonna beat your ass in the wind.
Right.
But it's a more forgiving rod, and you pair that with the proper line. I have a lot of guys that'll just go to I'm getting into this. I'm buying the best I could buy, but they come in with a 8-weight with a bonefish taper on it, and I'm like, dude, that's not the right line. You can't load the rod with that. You're not loading the rod. And then the only adjustment sometimes I'll do is I'll take them to the fly shop. We got a great fly shop in town that just opened up, Winnie Angler. But I'll take them to the fly shop after the trip and be like, this is what we're getting right here. This line right here. And 90% of the time they put that line on the rod.
Is that the Grand Slam?
The Grand Slam or any kind of 3/4 heavy. I'm not a big textured line guy. I never have been. I like a smooth line.
Okay.
But
And by 3/4 heavy, do you mean it's just
like
it's heavy?
overlined by 3/4.
Overlined, yeah.
So at 9 weight would be like a 9 3/4, almost a 10.
Yep.
So people have their opinions on overlining, but for your average caster who might have some struggles, it's going to help them. It's going to help them feel the load. Then maybe they can graduate into a bonefish taper. But the most important thing in the fly cast is being able to load the damn rod. Like, you have to be able to feel what it feels like to load that rod. If you can't load it, you ain't doing it. You know, like,
that's the key.
so we'll go spend $100. Be like, listen, just invest in this line. Invest in this line, and trust me, it will help your fly cast just because you could feel the line load the rod. And it usually, like, I have a couple guys. One of my clients, James, he's like killer. Like, if I tell him 70 feet at 11 o'clock, dude, he's gonna put it in a dinner plate.
Wow.
We had a line on his rod that, I could tell there was some issue with rod load, and I was like, man, we need to change. I felt it. It was like, it's a bonefish taper. I was like, you know what, we need to change that. Let's go to the fly shop. We put the boat up at the marina, walked over to the fly shop, put that line on. He texted me that night and he goes, geez Louise, dude, you don't understand how much of this rod feels like a completely different rod. So that's the important thing, is like, that's why you buy stuff from a fly shop, because you can, especially a fly shop that's tuned into what you want to fish. Like our fly shop, the Winyah angler, Chris Sapley, was a guide in Montana in the Keys. This guy's dialed. Like, he's not going to give you the wrong thing. Like, he'll bring you out there, have you cast, pick the right stuff for you, and send you out the door. The dude's goal is not to sell you for a $5,000 setup for you to be, this thing sucks. Like, so that's why, if I could say one thing to any angler or any new fly fisherman, like, invest a little. Might spend a little more money, buy from a fly shop. Go put your hands on the rod.
Yeah, find your local fly shop. That's
Find your
good
local
advice.
fly shop. These guys, they're going to support you. And Amazon don't fish.
Right. Yeah. And Amazon probably isn't putting a lot of conservation dollars and doing stuff like that, right?
Exactly. These guys care. Like, they care about your growth, because one, if you love it, they know you're coming back and you're going to spend more money with them. It's not all about that, though. The camaraderie and actually buying the right thing for your ability. You're not going to outgrow it. Like, that's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Well, this is awesome. I got a couple random ones here for you, Johnny. Let's. You mentioned at the start basketball, and I always love to get into a little sports chat. And basketball is one of my sports as well. You mentioned the AAU. It sounds like you were kind of, was this high school? You were kind of at a higher level there. Talk about that. What was your?
This was through like middle school. I played AAU ball.
What was your position?
I was a point guard.
Oh, me too. Okay, point guard. So when did you realize you weren't going to be pro in basketball? Did you
when I didn't grow?
There you go. So you were a fast grower in middle school, and then stopped.
No. I was always I thought I was going to hit my growth spurt at some point, and it just never happened.
Yeah.
So I took up golf after that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. But I played pretty serious AAU ball. I was fast. I could shoot, and I could handle. But when you start getting left to the sidelines, when everyone starts shooting up, it just wasn't.
Right.
I saw the writing on the wall. It wasn't for me.
So no high school ball.
No, I played high school golf, and I fished, and I surfed. I surfed competitively too. So.
Was that your sport? So if you had one sport looking back that you would be going pro on, or going pro at your best shot, which sport would it be?
Oh man.
Or would you love?
Probably surfing.
Oh, surfing. There you go.
Yeah. Or fishing. I don't know.
Surfing or
fishing.
But
yeah, I mean, I was a pretty good golfer, but I don't think it was ever at the level that I could have been super competitive. But I surfed competitively, and I've always fished. So I figured, like, I never wanted to be a guy wearing a jersey on a bass boat. That was never my goal. But
not quite there.
I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'm more the way I'm wired too. I like a lot of personal gratification. So, other people's view of how, my ability is that never really mattered to me. I loved it. And my thought about it was how I thought about myself was more important than anybody else's thought.
Yeah,
so
that's well said. Cool. And let's get you a little bit of music out of here before we get out of here. What's your, you're on a road trip. Are you listening to some music podcasts? What's that look like?
I listen to podcasts, but mostly if you're going to find me on the boat, it's going to be either reggae. I'll get into a Grateful Dead mode. I think you kind of have to be have them in your back pocket as a fly fishing guide. And I drive a 4Runner too, so I'm even more of a stereotype.
Oh, right.
But but yeah, mostly reggae. I've been a reggae guy my whole life, so I love
reggae. What's a
reggae.
reggae? What would be one? Is there a group
I
person?
like everything from like the old school like Peter Tosh, like
Oh yeah,
Gregory
Peter Tosh.
Isaacs,
Yeah, just everything.
Gregory Isaacs, all that,
Yeah,
and then I like
Gregory
the Cali
Isaacs.
stuff too, like Slightly Stupid and
Oh, yeah.
all them guys.
That's right.
Makes me feel happy.
Yeah, it does. Reggae's awesome. Love reggae. So we'll find some maybe some Slightly Stupid stuff to put in the show notes, and maybe we'll get it on Instagram as well. What's your podcast? Give us one. Like, what's your genre? Do you listen to like what types of podcasts you listen?
Fishing.
Oh, just all. So you do. So you listen to a lot of different fishing. Like,
yeah.
Give us one fishing. It could be gear, fly, whatever. What's one you like?
Honestly, just because of the stories that it comes along with it, I really like Millhouse.
Yeah, Millhouse are awesome. Yeah,
Millhouse is just well put together. They have, the way they're documenting the past. It's important to our game, and it's important to have these stories. And whether you like the person you're interviewing or not, I mean, there's always a lot of history in that.
Oh,
if you're married to the game like myself, and that kind of stuff. I just like all that stuff. Like I like stuff that gets emotional too,
Right.
That's like why I like Lords of the Fly so much, because you watch these guys like literally their lives fall apart for tarpon.
I know. I think we talked about, we had Andy Mill on the podcast. We'll put a link to that one as well. And I can't remember. I think he did talk about that a little bit because he was tied up, right? He was into all that too. I think part of it at least. So.
Oh yeah.
So good. All right, Johnny. Well, I think we'll leave it there today. We'll send everybody out to fishingblackwater.com if they have questions or want to get a trip. And yeah, thanks for all your time today. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
I'll just cap it off with name the company's Blackwater Revival Guide Service. We partner with Carolina Guide Service. We have 3 fly fishing guides out of the 4 that are in Georgetown. So there's me, Jordan Pate, and Thomas Chapman, and we all work together. So we have boats, we have skiffs. So if anyone wants to come and bring a group, we've got accommodations for people to stay here. And we're all full-time guides, and this is what we love to do. So anything you want to come down to South Carolina, we got you. You just tell us what you want, we'll help you set it up.
That's perfect. All right, Johnny. Well, we'll be hopefully sending some people down your way, and we'll definitely keep in touch and maybe get together with you as well down the line.
Right on, Dave. Appreciate it.
All right, quick reminder, call to action. If you enjoyed that one, you want to check in with Redfish. Sounds like Johnny's got a good program down there. He's got some good facilities, and who doesn't want to get on the water in South Carolina and check this out? Send over right now. Actually, you should check in with Johnny. Go to his website and go on Instagram either way. Let him know you heard this podcast and you want to check in on that trip. If you haven't already, you can follow this show. That's the best way to assure you get the next episode delivered into your inbox. You can do that right now. Hit that button on Apple Podcasts and or whatever app you're using, and we'll deliver that next episode for you. One reminder before we get out of here, the Steelhead School is going right now. If you're interested in getting a spot for the Steelhead School, this is out to BC, the Skeena Bay School this year. We got a couple big bonuses. Jeff Liskey is going to be on this trip, and also John McMillan. Both are going to be at the Skeena Bay Lodge with you if you get one of these spots. So if you want to learn more, hang out with John McMillan, hang out with Jeff Liskey, this is your chance. It's going to be epic. Brian Niska, a chance at a monster Skeena steelhead. Check in with me. Send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. That's the best way I can fill you in on what we have available. And yeah, that's all I got for you today. Really enjoyed this one. I'm glad you hung around to the very end. If you want to check in with this redfish, if you want us to get out there, you can also check in with me and let me know. I'd love to put that together for you as well. All right. Hope you have a good morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or good evening wherever you are in the world. And appreciate you for sticking around to the very end. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.